Welcome to Premise Factory, where I provide foundations in hope of inspiring some of you to pick up the pen. I'll be giving up a premise of a story, some possible characters, scenarios, and perhaps even twists that could lead to, and you can fill up the rest however you want. I am giving out these ideas for free. I don't need money as much as I need more international writers to butt out and prove to the Japanese industry that we aren't just afterthoughts. The future of the anime industry relies on the international market, so I believe that the most effective way to have the Japanese industry open to us is for us to go to their doorsteps. The Japanese writers aren't doing anything to save their own industry, so if you love anime and actually want a career in it, this is a way we can save it together. While I can't ensure that no one else have ever came up with the same ideas as these stories, or that there aren't some light novels or mangas already out there with these exact same premise, I do try my best to make them tamini naru sakuhin, or fiction that is helpful. By this I mean fiction that is trying to be more than just plain entertainment. This could mean that trying to be unique is a big point of the story, that it's trying to be a think piece, a commentary on something, an inspirational piece, just generally have some morals attached, or and so forth. I am not saying all anime should be like that these are the stories the anime industry is going to need to grow, that trying to be blunt entertainment for entertainment's sake is wrong, but it's the very same reason we're stuck in the loop of the same-ish story over and over. All of which just ended up being forgotten because none of them even tried to build an identity. It is the reason the anime industry is stinting its own growth, all while torturing its animators for no reason. I seek to change that, and that starts by changing the norms. Now, you may have just heard what I said, look at the title and say, trying to make things unique and try to make isekai? Are you drunk? Or what kind of rock have you been hiding under? Well, the point is, even though change is our goal, I'm not trying to just go in guns blazing and forcing them to overhaul the entire structure. It is undeniable that isekai is a trend that is selling right now, so I'll be offering both examples of isekai, non-isekai, and unique world, which whether or not it's an isekai is entirely up to you. Isekai is just a stage, just a setting, which means regardless of its stereotype, it doesn't have to stick with being your usual Gary Stu fare. Isekai can be reflective and inspirational. Just look at examples like Honseki no Keikokucho. Just like everything else, just because there's a bad stereotype attached to it, it doesn't mean you can't do better. If isekai is still the big trend wave right now, it doesn't mean we can't use that trend to our advantage. But it just means we also need to make isekai that can be better. Isekai that can be tamini naru. I have 2 isekai stories and 2 kinda isekai stories myself that I'm going to pitch here. But it doesn't mean I'm taking the easy way out and rehashing all the cliches in the book. I'm trying to make ones that can reflect on the protagonist both as a personal story and as a general reflection of the archetype in general. If isekai is currently problematic, who's to say we can't be the ones to fix it? Isekai's current issue is that it's all too monotonous and lay too hard into the escapism aspect of the genre, making the isekai be essentially just a playground where a protagonist can be the big bully, and anyone who doesn't kiss his ass needs to GTFO. I understand that most people who indulge in isekai escapism have a hard life, but does it help anything when your solution to it isn't to actually become a better person, but just to engage in self-pity story where you can pretend like you're the alpha? Does it feel better when your 20 minutes of power fantasy is over and you find yourself the sad person you were when you started? Feeling powerless and unloved is one thing, but what good does it do to you if you think suddenly everyone owes you, that you should be the king of the world despite having taken absolutely no effort to change your situation? This problem is the reason why nerd culture is looked down upon, and it is at its peak with the isekai genre. Which is why I think it is important that we should have more isekai that inspire people to be better, to help them reflect on their own flaws and not just be masturbatory fantasy. It doesn't mean your protagonist shouldn't have superpowers, it doesn't even mean he's not allowed to be strong. It just means isekai, as a world separate from the protagonist, should not solely revolve around him. That is the first thing I want you to remember when writing isekai. Don't make it blatant power fantasy, It can be escapism, it can reflect your desire for a better world, but instead of making you shut yourself into an echo chamber of self-pity, it should inspire you to take action, to go out there and try to make this world an actual better place too. When looking at a problem of monotony, that isekai are so very much often just carbon copies of each other. Most people would cite it as being due to light novel authors having ran out of ideas, though my argument would be more that rather than them running out of ideas, it's because isekai authors aren't even trying to look for new ideas. Isekai, and to a further extent much of light novels, are extremely derivative. Again, because light novel marketing tactics do absolutely nothing to encourage people with individualism, and because there simply isn't any penalty to not be original. That combined with the general close-mindedness of the Japanese society, and voila, you have the million isekai set in the exact same world. Isekai, and arguably most modern fantasy that are set in a Dragon Quest-esque and Tolkien-esque world, overuse this medieval setting to the point that they have taken the magic and mysticism out of the fantasy. There simply isn't any joy and awe in seeing dragons or people shooting fireballs anymore. Personally, I am bored of the generic fantasy setting so much that it would be a negative to me even on stories like Goblin Slayer that is neither an isekai nor take inspiration from Dragon Quest. Well, in that particular case, that's just the beginning of the problem, but you get what I'm saying. It's not hard to come up with newer worlds for isekai, and today we will be looking at that. Isekai worlds different from the magic already made mundane. The examples I give today are just the basics. Some will be enough for you to run with, some might need more work, but today the examples I give are open-ended, and if you want more specific examples, stay tuned for next time. Now let's get into the real premises. I am giving out these for free because I don't want money. I want an army who can help fight alongside me and change the industry. Yep, this is the easiest way to make a different isekai. Just change the location and time. Have it be in ancient India, ancient China, Aztec Empire, Southeast Asia, colonial Australia, and even in Europe, you can do plenty of things just by setting it in a different era. Napoleonic France, Revolutionary France, Age of Exploration in Spain, Ottoman Empire, Soviet Russia, etc. Hell, the fact that there isn't many isekai set in Japanese theme setting in itself is baffling. I mean, sure, there's a couple of Sengoku isekai, and you also often see random kitsune or oni race in western theme isekai for no particular reason, but the point is, there isn't any isekai set in Jomo, Edo, or World War II Japan. Just goes to show how unwilling Japanese writers are to even peek outside the box. I mean, yeah, I kinda understand with the World War II thing, but not the rest. And I don't just mean change the skin and make everything the same. You could just reskin elves, dwarves, and orcs into Vanaras, Nagas, and Rakshasas in an Indian setting, but that's not enough. You should also explore what each of those eras and countries have to offer. Explore the caste system in India, human sacrifice in the Aztec Empire, penal colony in Australia, religious missionary in Spain, and glorious communism in Mother Russia. Now add magic to the mix. Yes, because we're still doing fantasy, there's still magic. So now explore when things like the caste system, human sacrifice, Spanish Inquisition, and gulags aren't just people abusing human rights, but actually part of the magic system. What if the caste system is created because the people at the top are actual demigods who literally will be tainted if they mingle with the lower class? Even if the protagonist is powered, you'd expect him to fight for the little people. But how will he do it if he literally also cannot touch them without losing power? What if the protagonist fought against human sacrifice, claiming it to be superstitious cruelty, only to literally see apocalyptic consequences when the sun doesn't rise the next morning? Something like that. They're not savory things to tackle, but it is the actual moral complication that will actually help make your story deep and more sophisticated than the protagonist going to the world, point his finger to those unsavory practice, scream bad, then suddenly everyone stopped doing it without question. Explore the actual real-world culture and society that leads to those events. Use it to explore your world building, and you have a top isekai in no time. Just be sure not to go too edgelord on it. A good example to take after in this case would be Yojo Senki, since it's just World War I with magic, and Tanya captures a good example of the mentality of a soldier fighting in World War I. Despite being in the air, she's constantly fearing for her life, no different than the ones in the trenches who never knew when or how they're going to be blown up. Or if you're not the one who likes research, here's your alternative. It's modern world, but it's modern fantasy world. As bad of an example as it was, I'm talking about a similar setting to Bright or Onward. It's modern world with cars, smartphone, high-rise building, and capitalism, but with fantasy creatures in it. Orcs, elves, dwarves, and other humanoid races are just normal people. Technology is advanced on a level relatively equal to us, no more, no less. The protagonist could be a corporate slave in Tokyo, got isekai by Truck-kun, only to find himself penniless in an isekai version of Tokyo. He escaped the fate of a Chachiku in Japan, only to become a Chachiku in an isekai. So now you can get your aggressive Red Scoop style workplace comedy with a cocky elf, a dwarf constantly drunk on the job, an orc cop trying to arrest the protagonist for insulting his culture, and maybe a boss with a literal dragon. And like Red Skull, you could still also throw in real relatable human conflict into these characters. Or you could go with the classic Isekai Zero Saves the World plot, but this time his opponents would be the corrupted politicians of the world. And since it is supposed to be a world akin to ours, simply pulling your sword on the politicians simply would not work, so how is the protagonist supposed to fight back? From there, you can branch the path even further. Maybe the protagonist could pursue a political career, therefore turning this story into a political thriller in the fantasy world. Or maybe he's fighting against a secret evil fantasy conspiracy, but since we have to modern out the setting, it'd be a spy thriller or even a hacker story with fantasy taste to it. James Bond vs. Cthulhu, how about that? Or what about the protagonist trying to break into that world's entertainment world? Maybe he's trying to win a singing competition in the fantasy world. Maybe he's trying to become a movie star or try to create fantasy Hollywood. Maybe he could even become a writer and get famous exactly by writing about our world, which would in turn appear as a fascinating alternate universe to the people of that fantasy world. See? With that simple starting point alone, you could simply tap into tons of fields that normal isekai never touch. This one is so obvious I wondered why no one has ever done it before. It's basically just a classic Castaway story, only that it's an isekai instead of a deserted island. The protagonist, or preferably a group of protagonists, is transported to an hostile isekai, where they must fight to survive and perhaps find their way home. Isekai in the jungle, isekai in the desert, isekai in the middle of the ocean, isekai in Dino Land, isekai on an alien planet, isekai in zombie apocalypse. The possibilities are infinite. Yet again, this isn't really all that different from maybe just having a plane crash in a said location, so perhaps you could always spice it up by having the fantastical element play a role in the survival. Perhaps they have to learn magic to start fire, maybe they have to steal the alien tech to survive, maybe learning the orcs' language to negotiate with them, maybe have to learn to tame the local fauna, devoting yourself to a local god to gain protection against the undead, use modern medical knowledge to cure some alien disease. An example to take after in this case is Kanata no Astra, which is a good story emphasized on survival in a fantastical environment and, most importantly, where survival comes from teamwork rather than just one person doing everything. But of course, do keep in mind that the genre is supposed to be survival, which means even in this fantastical element, your protagonist must remain vulnerable and idealistically, not everyone should be able to make it out alive with all their limbs intact. You could also ramp up the horror aspect. Maybe the people who summon the protagonist are a group of vampires who summon them just to be food because maybe they have already eaten every other human on their planet, or I don't know, maybe the humans on our world is tastier because modern nutrition and medicine made us better meal than the skinny medieval peasants. So now you got Yakusoku no Neverland in Isekai. With that idea, you can just adapt Bram Stoker's Dracula, except, Isekai. Just make sure you handle the Human is food angle well enough that it doesn't come off as just another try-hard Shingeki no Kyojin ripoff as well. So now, let's level up the survival. Isekai in a hostile world, but one with psychological horror, where the world is deadly and will kill you, but maybe doesn't really give a damn about your existence in the first place. It's basically survival isekai with a cerebral horror in it. Therefore, the protagonist should be allowed to have superpowers, but you have to make sure you don't fall into the pitfall of bad Lovecraft ripoff, where you just make Cthulhu just a big octopus monster with a big HP bar. You have to show that the protagonists, despite gaining new and awesome power, and are able to handle themselves against smaller monsters, are still very much powerless against the real eldritch abominations. As such, I would also recommend that you use a group of protagonists in this story. Idealistically, they should have come to the isekai at a different time and therefore has different level of experiences when it comes to handling this world. One protagonist may still think he's in the typical isekai where he's the unbeatable hero, while another is traumatized from a deadly encounter and is tipping on the edge of insanity, for example. I will confess, this was one of the isekai stories I have written and scrapped. Though I will also admit that it was easily one of the weakest stories I have wrote, if merely for the sake that I believe I am terrible at writing horror. Now let's keep the inhumanity but cut down on the horror aspect. Another common theme that people, including myself, are sick of in isekai is that how often it comes with the harem genre built into it. And harem genres are just terrible in general for depicting fleshed out characters who remotely act like real humans. So one easy way to assess that is to have the protagonist be transported into an isekai without any humanoids. Maybe the inhabitants of the isekai are all sentient bugs or jellyfish. Or if you want to go comedic, you may even play the harem trope straight. Have those bugs or jellyfish girls fall for your protagonist, much to his do not want. Or who knows, maybe the protagonist will even develop jelly fetish. In this case, the protagonist's superpower may just be the fact that he's the only one with opposable thumbs. The idea is just a starting gimmick, the rest of the story is blank, so if you want to use it, well, I guess you can just go wild. Though, do not go to Tensei Sarasraim that Taken wrote, where the premise is to be a non-humanoid story, so Rimuru gaining human form just defeats the whole point of it. Now, this is another fun one. Another isekai that emphasizes on the protagonist's powerlessness. The protagonist is transported to an Orwellian dystopia where everything is monitored. So now he is an illegal immigrant in a place where illegal immigrants are to be shot on sight. This can easily also overlap into survival isekai, though with a very different twist. Again, this is the case if he does have superpowers. It should be limited to the bare minimum that will allow him to survive and not one that will allow him to blow up the dystopian government on whim. Alternatively, maybe he does have the identification somehow. Maybe it was actually more of his consciousness being transferred into someone who already lived in a dystopia, so now he has to try and survive by acting the role of this person, well, not that he doesn't get caught by the government. From there, he could start or join the rebels to overthrow the dystopian government. Though in that case, you need to be careful as to not fall into the pitfall of the YA dystopia novel cliches. Or yet alternatively, the protagonist can fall into the role of one of the people, if not the top, who is ruling the dystopia themselves. In this place, you also have many paths you can go. Will the protagonist try to overthrow the government from the inside? Or will he be corrupted by power? Will he bring prosperity to the world while keeping it in dystopia? Or will it collapse because of its ineptness? Then there's the other side of the coin we can go to, isekai in anarchist dystopia. The protagonist is now transported to a lawless world a la Hokuto no Ken or Mad Max, where the strong kill and pillage the weak. While again, it may be easy to have the protagonist be overpowered and therefore go on everyone in sight, or just make it another survival isekai, I have a different idea. What if the protagonist was given the task of bringing peace to this wasteland? And not by force. He is to become the ruling power who brings order to dystopia, but he has to do it diplomatically. Perhaps he's granted the superpower of immortality to do this job. Noted, only immortality for this body, so he still would not have any offensive capabilities beyond that of a normal human being. And therefore, instead of being the other muscle-bound thugs of the wasteland, he's the one who would end up getting. He won't die, no matter how many times he got.
お前は
お前はもう
もう死んでいる。
死んでいる。
He would stand up and say, 俺はまだ死んでいない, and continue to negotiate diplomatic terms with the brutes. This should both be perfect for comedy and to actually show the protagonist's resolution, because while he may not die, it still would hurt as hell every time. So when he does manage to bring enough people together to create an orderly community, how will he try to keep it stable? How will he protect it? What will he do to see this community grow and prosper? An alternative idea to this is to have the world be an anarchist dystopia, but not so bad as post-apocalyptic like Hokuto no Mad Max, but one that the common people still have houses to live in, are still civilized enough to not kill each other. They do have constant protests and do very much want to kill the guys in charge, like in the French Revolution or, well, France today. Here the protagonist is handed the position of the head of state in a society on the brink of collapsing and is told, hey, you sort this shit out. So it could clearly turn into a story of critique or satire on politics, which, you know, for a genre known for people wanting power for themselves, is strangely rarely ever tapped in by the isekai genre. I'll be doing more ideas on specific dystopian setting in a future episode, so if you're interested, please subscribe and stay tuned for that. At any rate, just imagine your typical fantasy race, elves, orcs, dwarves, but in Mad Max fashion. I mean, that in itself would be a unique aesthetic, as well as a goldmine for world building. And now that we have discussed both sides of the dystopian isekai coin, let's flip that coin once more. There, an isekai where the protagonist arrived in, thinking this world would be in dire need for his help, but it actually turns out the world is actually perfect as it is. The technology is so advanced that his pitiful smartphone is completely useless, and where science had marched on so much, everyone is so smarter that the protagonist feels like a caveman. It would be entertaining to see a direct reverse, where the protagonist was already a Gary Stu in the modern world, got transported into this futuristic isekai, and since everyone is now far more smarter and even physically fitter than him, he has no choice but to flip burgers in this world. In fact, if you want the story to be even more of an inversion of the Masai complex isekai, you can even make it that the protagonist ended up ruining the Utopia isekai, either to his ineptness or because he is unwillingly harboring a destructive power or something. Maybe it's the virus. Though of course, as much of a middle finger this premise would be to the average isekai story, it also feels like a one-liner gag that wouldn't last long, nor would make for an actual engaging story when the protagonist doesn't really do anything useful, nor the story has anything to say apart from spitting in the face of other isekais. So if you want to use this concept, you better be able to spin it some other way too. Alternatively, you can make the protagonist very slick. He's smart, in terms of book smart, he still is completely uncomparable to the rest, but he could be a genius in people manipulation instead. You could also hand-wave it that people in the future is so trusting because they live in a utopia society where there is just no reason to be dishonest to each other. From there, you could make a Yagami lifestyle protagonist where he manipulates the others into doing his bidding and elevate himself. He doesn't necessarily bring the downfall of the society, but he would stay to control it all by himself. Again, this could make for an entertaining villain protagonist story, though it would also bring with it all the potential pitfall the archetype entails. So people could easily grow to hate your story when they thought it was way too mean-spirited. You know how, like a single episode turned everyone against Ainz. Now, speaking of Ainz, if you need to go with fantasy, don't stick with the mundane overused setting. If you have to rip off someone fresh. And that fresh someone happens to be over 40 years old. I mean, this is why I disagree when people said Overlord or Goblin Slayer have good world building. because they didn't actually do anything beyond just ripping off D&D whole hog. And yet they didn't even use the thing that made D&D unique. Instead of being the millionth story to use elves, dwarves, and orcs as is, go for seldom seen races like reptilian kobolds that worship dragons, Yuan-Ti, Warforged, Tiefling, Aarakocra, etc. Draw enemies like Mind Flayers and Beholders, and use them more than just being generic monsters. Try adventures like traveling through different planes, explore the magic system where the types are divided into intellect, wisdom, and charisma. D&D can be a treasure trove for things far more unique than just princesses, dragons, and castles. So it baffles me despite how massive it is. People, both in the East and the West, never really used the thing that made D&D wacky into their stories. And hey, here's another important thing from D&D that Overlord and Goblin Slayer forgot. You're supposed to have other players have fun too. Don't just have the protagonist hog all the glory by himself. Alright, as a starter, this should do for now. Do remember that these are just basics and I intentionally left everything vague in the open for wherever you want to take them. If you want stories with more specific pointers, wait for next time, where we'll be talking about non-isekai stories with meta commentary. If you are interested in these ideas, feel free to contact me. I may have additional tips I could give, or even if you don't want tips, our Discord channel is linked below in the description, so that we can talk among ourselves as people who want to save the industry together. Another thing I would advise if you want to hop on this project, you must be well versed in Japanese enough to be able to write natural sounding dialogues, about into at the very least in JLPT. If not, then I hope you have someone else who is very good in Japanese to help translate dialogue for you. Or if you have original ideas of your own, that's also great in itself. In that case again, feel free to join the Discord so we could discuss it. If you don't think you want to write but still want to help, then feel free to show support through the change.org and Patreon page in the description. Next week, we will be looking at my second pitching story, a spy political story in NSA MSS MI6. Please like, share, subscribe, and see you next time.